Hello, I'm the Media Wiz, because One Art Form wasn't enough, and I guess this is a follow-up review, vlog kind of thing to something I've previously done a video on. Last year, I did a review of Super Secret Crisis War, which was a crossover comic of 5 different Cartoon Network shows. It had Samurai Jack, Ben 10, Dexter's Lab, Powerpuff Girls, and Ed, Edd n Eddy. So, it was a 6-issue series, and it was a really good comic. Like, some of the dialogue probably could have been changed just a little bit, but other than that, it was a pretty good comic, and I'm pretty satisfied with the way that review came out. And I briefly mentioned in that review that there was actually a couple of side comics, some spin-off comics, involving other Cartoon Network shows, and, well, I have the trade of those 5 issues right here. This is Super Secret Crisis War Volume 2, and it's all 5 of those side comics put into one. Now, despite what's on the cover, these shows actually don't have any direct crossover. Each of these comics are pretty much just their own little side stories that all relatively take place within their own universes. And it's not like, oh, these guys go on a big epic adventure like in Volume 1 where it has all the characters literally crossover. These are basically just the events or certain types of events that go on in the main comic that briefly cross over into the worlds of these. Specifically, they have it that when the army of robots go looking for heroes in their home dimensions, some of them end up making pit stops and end up going into different universes. So like I said, all these comics are pretty much just their own little side stories, and most of them are pretty much written like just regular episodes of each of their shows, which I actually liked. I like the fact that they didn't try to force a whole big crossover event, because with the other one, it actually did work for the most part, and so it'd probably be a little bit tricky to try and cross these characters over another time with a completely different cast. And I mean, also, it doesn't help that some of these have had some crossover before. I mean, Kids Next Door and Billy and Mandy did an episode where they all crossed over, and Foster's and Billy and Mandy referenced each other a couple of times, but I like the fact that it wasn't just one big crossover event, like, because that's what the first comic was for. But this one is just kind of like, each comic is its own little event, and they just happen to cross paths with these giant robots from, you know, this big event going on somewhere else. And the thing that I liked about most of these comics was that they were written like a lot of the episodes in these shows. The Johnny Bravo story is about the robot landing on Johnny's Earth, trying to find one of the heroes, but of course it comes across Johnny. And there's a girl that Johnny's trying to flirt with who's obviously not interested in him, and she says that she has a boyfriend, and she points to the robot, says that it's her boyfriend, and Johnny decides that he wants to fight the robot, and the robot misconstrues it like, oh, like, you know, fight, like, that's what the heroes do, that's what Samurai Jack does, that's what Ben 10 does, that's what Dexter or the Powerpuff Girls do. But, of course, Johnny just says he wants to fight him by winning a bunch of different carnival games, and the person who wins the most carnival games gets that girl's hand. And the robot is just confused, and by the end of it, he just can't take enough, and he ends up teleporting away. Although the Johnny Bravo one does answer the question as to where the squirrel came from in the main comic. Again, in the review, I mentioned there was a whole thing about a squirrel that went through a teleporter. That's where the squirrel came from. It came from the Johnny Bravo universe. So that explains that. Next story was Billy and Mandy, and it's pretty much like what you'd expect in the show, except this time there's 2 robots that end up merging, and it's like a 2-headed robot, and it's often like one knows what it's doing, the other one doesn't, so it's kind of reflective of Billy and Mandy. It kind of reminded me of how they did the whole, you know, evil robot Billy and Mandy thing in a Big Boogie Adventure. Billy thinks the robot is their friend, it's obviously not, and Grim and Mandy tell him that he's an idiot for thinking that. This comic kind of reinforces the fact that Grim is pretty much just destined to a afterlife of servitude, because he literally is wearing a maid outfit in one panel, and it made me think of that SpongeBob bit where SpongeBob was donning the maid outfit for Squidward. Eventually the robot gets loose, tries fighting and destroying a bunch of different people and property, and I like how this one ends because it really feels like they're writing these like an episode of the show, because the way this comic ends, it involves them sending the robot to a self-help guide, and he basically just tells them to, you know, oh, love yourself, and don't be afraid to show your emotions, and the robot ends up becoming friendly. They don't even get rid of it, it's just still there probably, but That's honestly the kind of ending I'd expect from Billy and Mandy. So the fact that it ended like that, I was like, okay, that fits the theme of that show to a T. And as a person that, for the most part, liked Billy and Mandy, I thought that was a pretty appropriate way of carrying out that story. Next up is Foster's. We have it that one of the robots lands in the world of Foster's. And maybe this is just me, and I don't know if anyone else is like this. There probably are some people that are like this, but I like to imagine that Foster's and Powerpuff Girls are the same universe because, I mean, they're both McCracken shows. So part of me felt like if that robot went to a different part of the city, or maybe just a couple towns over, then he would be in Townsville. But whatever. The robot lands at Foster's, Goo discovers it, and he makes up a fake name saying that he's Pixels, that he's a robot imaginary friend. And coincidence upon coincidence, there's actually a real robot imaginary friend named Pixels already at the house, and it has the ability to like shapeshift. And there's this whole thing of them trying to set up for another Adopt-a-Thought event, you know, so that new friends can get adopted. Meanwhile, Mac and Blue are having fun with this new Pixels guy, and honestly, I like the fact that, because this is so rarely seen in the show, maybe a little bit earlier on, but it seems like it's very rare in the show you see Mac getting into shenanigans with Blue. It's usually Blue getting into hijinks. So I kind of like the fact that Mac was tagging along with him on that. It actually made it feel like, you know, Mac and Blue were friends instead of like the later seasons of the show where Blue was just a huge douchebag in a lot of episodes. But anyway, so that's going on. The robot tries to fight and destroy people at first, but after, you know, characters like Wilt and Eduardo show him kindness, the robot decides he doesn't even want to be evil anymore or fight. But then he comes face to face with the actual Pixels, and they decide that they actually are friends, because all Pixel wanted was an actual robot friend that he could get along with. And then when, you know, the no longer evil Pixels says that he'll be his friend, it shows them going up into space together. And I was like, that's a cute ending. It's the kind of thing, again, like how all these stories feel like they're written exactly to fit in with the continuity of each of these shows. That felt like the perfect way of ending it in a Foster story. Next up was Cow and Chicken, and honestly, I was never the world's biggest fan of Cow and Chicken growing up. Watching it now, I do get the appeal of it. It is kind of like Cartoon Network's answer to Ren and Stimpy. It's the same thing with I Am Weasel. It's like, I get what the appeal of it is. It's just, it was never really my thing growing up. But the story itself, it's very straightforward. Cow wants someone to spend time with because Chicken says that he doesn't want to be her friend, even though he's her brother. And then they go to a place called Starbutts, which I was like, okay, I see what they did there. That's the kind of joke that I would definitely see if they tried making a new Cow and Chicken show. The robot shows up, it gets some coffee spilled on it, and it ends up short-circuiting, and it decides that it wants to be Cow's friend, and Cow is really happy about this, but then it starts annoying Chicken, and then eventually the robot snaps out of it and is ready to kill Cow, but then Chicken saves the day, and as her brother, he decides he'll be her friend. All the while, Red Guy keeps popping in and out, and he honestly has probably some of the funnier lines in the comic. But the one thing I absolutely loved about the story was they actually felt the need to like write in all the different kind of like speech impediments that they have, like how Cow talks, like, you know, instead of sorry, it's sawi. They really knew how to handle like the dialogue and the way that these characters talk. But yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's a lot like the Johnny Bravo one, where it's dictated less about the story and it's a little bit more focused on humor. Like Billy and Mandy was also pretty much focused on humor as well, but it feels like that comic was a little bit more about the story. It had like a beginning, middle, and end. This one's just kind of like, okay, robot shows up, malfunctions, and then shenanigans happen. Just like how the Johnny Bravo one's just like, okay, robot shows up, Johnny tries to fight it so that they can win a girl's affection, robot eventually leaves because he can't take it anymore. But this one, yeah, it's just pretty much based on humor, versus the Foster's one, which had, you know, like actual background characters and like two separate plots going on that eventually collide. You get what I'm saying. The last one is probably my favorite, and that's the Kids Next Door one. And maybe it's just because Kids Next Door was one of my favorite shows growing up on Cartoon Network. It was up there. Like I mean, Ed, Edd n Eddy and Powerpuff Girls are my top two, and then there's a couple of other ones that kind of compete for like what would be 3, 4, 5. Like Kids Next Door, Billy and Mandy, a couple of other ones. I really liked a lot of these kind of shows because it was the kind of stuff I was watching while growing up. And so this one, honestly, out of all of them, this was literally just like reading an episode. Giant robot shows up, Sector Z, numbers 1 through 5 have to take it out, and basically the comic is just them trying to figure out different ways to stop it, and of course everyone has their own little means of stopping it. Ultimately, it comes down to number 5's plan is the one that stops it. There's a funny part of the comic where Father and the delightful children from down the lane all get just beaten and thrown away by the robot. I thought that was pretty funny. Like I was saying all throughout, how all these comics kind of feel like they were done in the styling of each of their shows. This does feel like the most episode worthy of Kids Next Door. It does feel like a just regular episode. Giant robot shows up and the gang have to figure out a way to stop it. I feel like the way that they portrayed that in the comic, they pretty much nailed the style of humor, the way it's written, the way the characters would act. It actually felt very, very refreshing to see a comic that was tying in line. And obviously there's a couple of other comics. I mean, when I reviewed the Invader Zim comic, it felt exactly the same way. But it did feel like, wow, this actually is a really good continuation of Kids Next Door, and it's good to see them, carrying on the show that, again, Tom Warburton, the creator, really wanted to bring back after all this time. So out of all of them, in my own personal ranking, and I'm not even trying to say that any of these comics are bad per se, I'm just saying that my personal favorites were probably the Kids Next Door one, and then probably the Fosters one or the Billy and Mandy one. Those are probably my 3 favorites. The Giant Bravo one is good, but it feels like a little short in some areas. It just kind of goes like, okay, set up, and then feels like it's kind of over like that. It's like, oh, okay. And the Cow and Chicken one, it's funny. It's just that, once again, Cow and Chicken was not really my thing growing up. So I admit I am biased on that. But even with that said, this is still a good collection of comics. I really would recommend, if you want one that's a little bit more heavy on story, then obviously, go with the original 6-issue Volume 1 of Super Secret Crisis War. But if you want to see fun little crossover events, or you just want to read some, comics based on some old nostalgic Cartoon Network shows, then yeah, I highly recommend checking out Volume 2. But yeah, overall, very good collection of comics. I recommend it. So tune in next time, and I'm going to be looking at a DVD. Yes, I'm going to be doing another DVD review, and this time we're going to be looking at one that was requested a couple times over. It was a request for a review of the Big Fat Liar DVD. Unlike last time where we looked at Cat in the Hat, which has an interesting DVD, to say the least, despite it being a movie that a lot of people don't like, we're looking at a movie that has a DVD, and both of which are pretty unique in their own way, and the movie is Big Fat Liar. So we're going to be reviewing the Big Fat Liar DVD next time. I did intend for this to be a review, but after trying to write jokes for it, I couldn't really think of anything, so instead I just decided to make this a quick little vlog to talk about this fun little collection of comics. But yeah, so next time, look forward to a review of the Big Fat Liar DVD. I'm the Media Wiz, because one art form wasn't enough.